And
Oh,
welcome to part one of what is going to be a really terrific and exciting Pesach intensive. It's kind of if you were around for the not this year but the previous year for High Holidays, we did a wonderful um, uh, High Holiday
hello.
month, Elul's month. Thanks, Bonnie. Someone's paying attention. Uh, and then all of the classes were kind of in preparation for High Holiday, so we thought we would do something similar around Passover, and each one of us on clergy and on staff decided to take the themes and topics that were interesting to us. And so I will be teaching two classes. This week and next week around the topic of, which you know because you've registered for this, but around the topic of the art of the Haggadah. And it's huge. It's a huge topic, and this could very well be an entire semester, and it could very well be another 4 hours. But it's not. It's going to be 1 hour today and 1 hour next week. So what I'm just going to give you a little intro to as to what today's class is going to look like, so you can feel prepared, whatever that means for you. So today's class, we're going to look a little bit at the actual history of the codification of the Haggadah. We'll talk a little bit about what that means over the course of Jewish history. How did the Haggadah come to be in the form that we know it? Because as you know, there are, although subtle differences in the way translations work or in the way certain texts are kept in their entirety. In some Haggadot, you have the addition, supplemental information, supplemental commentary. The Haggadah itself comes in a pretty straightforward breakdown. And so if we take a look at the history of that, it kind of informs us also around the art of the Haggadah, because if you're looking at something that has a text that's really been consistent over the years, then you can also imagine that through time and space, those particular moments of text will have room for illustration, right? So if you always have the four sons, and that's part of the Haggadah, then it makes sense that there would be many different ways in which that the imagery over time has either right been creatively interpreted or perhaps been. I know the Four Sons is a really great example of something that, if we look at contemporary illustrations, we look at classic illustrations, they're not. There's a lot of differences in that. But I'm jumping ahead to the contemporary stuff. Today we're going to actually be doing a bit of a time machine hop. We're going back to the early days of the codification of the Haggadah, and we're going to take a look at two different schools of illustration or illumination, rather. And those two different types of illumination are going to be an Ashkenazi style and a Sephardic style, as per the time period that we're going to be looking at. So I have a very extensive slideshow. If anyone's taken a class with me, they know I love my slideshows. I have a very extensive slideshow, which has a lot of historic facts, and it also has a lot of examples for us to take a look at. And something that is kind of challenging about using visual images that are only available in libraries of Congress and in other kind of archival places is that I don't have the images in front of me to really be able to zoom in and look at them. So as best I could, I found examples that are going to be clear enough for us to see, but also keep in mind that the originals of most of these examples that we're going to be looking at are either in private collections or belong to museums, and there are only a limited amount of images that are in circulation. So just prefacing that so that no one is like, I can't see anything. So I have done my best. Hello, Carol. Welcome. All right. So let's begin. Actually, you know what? Before we begin with my slideshow, I'm going to just ask a general question to the room, which is, what, and this is kind of along the lines of doesn't have an answer that I'm thinking of, but I want you to think about what you would answer to this question. What does visual enhancement or illustration, illumination, color, what does that do for you personally when you're engaging with text? So if we think about our Siddur, we think about our Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll that we use. I would say with an exception or two of some kind of calligraphic illustrations, we really don't use texts that have a lot of color, that have a lot of illustration. Would that be safe to say that in our day-to-day Jewish practice we don't? Okay, so I want to think about what that means to have that addition, to have that sort of added flourish in a text. And is it something that's necessary? Is it something that for you personally would be something that would engage you? And if so, what added level would that give? So I want you to think about what that means to you, and let's share a little bit about where we're coming from with that particular sensibility. For some of us, we're very visual people. Some people see color, and it doesn't really, it's not something that's important to them. Yeah, Eric. Oh, and also before you start, I know that you'll all be together hopefully for many, many weeks to come. Because it's only an hour class, I don't want to go around the room and talk about, our connection to art. But I would love for you before you speak, if you could just say your name to the group. Sorry,
Sure.
I
Yeah,
already.
no worries. I'm Eric, and I think this answers very much from my experience converting to Judaism that this will be only my second Pesach. But when I think of the visualization, I think of little kids, that it seems like Pesach, the really big point of it is passing on to the future generations the story, and visualization and artwork makes it more engaging than just pure text.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's definitely put a pin in that one. Terrific. All right, Barbara.
For me, and I'm an art lover, it just it brings it to life. It makes it real when you have artwork around whatever it is, because somebody did that. It's not just, well, the creating the text with the calligraphy and all is an art, of course, but it takes imagination and it takes life um to bring it, so it makes it more personal and more real to me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, this all gonna come back to us. Terrific, Sharon.
I think it enhances, like I know, like when studying Psalms, when I listen to a Psalm that's done musical, and I never realized how many musical versions there are of all the Psalms, it takes it to another level for me. If the Psalm is despair and I see despair in the visual media, it just
Mm,
takes you to another level, visual cues.
right,
And there are
terrific.
people who only learn that way, children, like,
Right, it's
as
it's another
kids.
level. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Carol.
Unmute? Okay. Um, in some ways, we are all kids at heart. We like to look at the pictures. The pictures make us feel better.
Right.
It's also, this is a long procedure, the Haggadah. As so I heard a comedian say, you're never going to look so forward to a hard-boiled egg.
You're
So
never,
looking at the pictures,
yeah.
and it makes you understand the whole process better.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thanks, Carol. Peaches, what's on your mind?
Um, I wanted to say that for me, when there's illustration of any kind, it creates a perspective
Mm,
to start with. And then I finish the reading, and often I go back to kind of double check to see if it lined up. Or,
wonderful.
yeah.
Wonderful. It's so interesting because for some people, the idea that the illustrations are about an added layer that give an added meaning. For some people, it's a reference point. For other people, it's a way of engaging. And we know just by being people in the world that using all of your senses and every modality really turns things in different directions. Things that you may not have been really focusing on. There, you add in a level of smell or a level of sound, and suddenly that experience becomes deeper. And I'll just say this as well, just to add on to, and I'm sure that this is something that you're all thinking as well. The, the experience of the Passover Seder, the experience itself is an immersive experience, right? It is meant in its and I would love to go back, thousands of years to ask those guys who put this whole thing together over hundreds of years, didn't happen overnight, whether the whole purpose of creating the Seder was to engage with all of our senses, right? The ultimate mitzvah of the telling of the story, which we're going to get to momentarily, is that you yourself should feel as though you are experiencing this exodus, right? So that bechol dor vado, in every generation, chayav adam lirot et atzmo, a person must imagine themselves ke'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim, as though he himself exited Egypt in the most actually like visceral way. So how do we imagine that? We eat bitter things and salty things. We smell. Some traditions they hit each other with scallions to mimic the whipping of the Egyptians to the slaves. There are songs that we sing, and the other added bit is that we're looking at this text that is supposed to be visually enhancing. And I'm not sure, honestly, if that was indeed the purpose of creating these illustrated supplements to the Haggadah, because I think that there probably are traditions where there aren't any pictures and it really is just a text that you read and you go through. But I do think, like you've all said, that visualization is a way to engage, right? To engage at a different level and at a deeper level. Great. So we've set ourselves up. What we're going to do is I see that we should have done this class an hour and 15, but we're just going to keep it at an hour because I can't change it now. But we're going to go through the kind of presentation that I have that is going to go through early versions of the Haggadah. And at any point, if you are, you have a question, you have a comment, I am, as you know, I'm not stuck to what I'm teaching. I'm more than happy to stop and take a tangential discussion in a direction to talk about what we're looking at. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the history, the very quick history of when did the Haggadah as a book become codified, and then we're going to look at some examples of these incredibly interesting and very historic. Like you'll see that what I'll show you is very different than what you would imagine a modern day, obviously, Haggadah to look like, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that is. So let me just put the slide so it fits on the page. And then you guys can give me a thumbs up if you can see what's going on. Hold on one second. It is not perfect yet. Okay. Sort of perfect. All right. So let's take a look at this, a little bit of a fact sheet here. I'm going to start off with this first page because I think that this is an important thing for us to think about. When we talk about Haggadah, what does the word Haggadah mean? And anyone who's studied Hebrew of any sort can take a gander on what that Haggadah could mean. And you can look at the page because it'll give you the answer, because I like to kind of give the answer as much as I like to ask the question. Barry, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, isn't it the telling?
Correct.
It's the story, right. But the telling, yeah. Yeah,
right. Haggadah is a telling, right? In this weird translation, which we're going to look at in just a second, it looks like it says explain, an explanation, but in fact, lehagid means to speak, or Haggadah is a telling. So if you look at the very beginning of the prescription, as it says, to observe Passover, it comes from the Torah, comes from Exodus chapter 13, and these three verses, 6, 7, and 8, I should have cited them, but I didn't, verses 6, 7, and 8, are telling us here the very baseline of what this holiday is. And as you do know, Passover is a holiday that comes from the Torah. There aren't a million of them. Not every holiday we celebrate. Purim is not a holiday that comes from the Torah. It happened after the Torah, so it's not in the Torah. The holidays of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, or rather Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, or Sukkot, those three regalim, the three pilgrimage holidays, those are in the Torah, as is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And all the other holidays we have are post. So this particular holiday had a prescription, and this is what it said. It said 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a festival. The Torah does not go into details about what that means. And on those 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leavened bread found in all of your territory. From here we get this: you're not allowed to go anywhere near bread. Okay, we know that. And the last one, there is another passage that I didn't copy in here that tells us about the eating of the paschal sacrifice, the sacrificial lamb, the Pesach, matzah, and maror, which are the three items that are supposed to represent this the idea of Passover, right? The sacrifice that the children of Israel made as the night that they were packing up to leave Egypt, the matzah, the unleavened bread, and the maror, the bitter herbs. So there's a very rough idea of what Passover is. The last one here, vehigadita levincha, and you shall explain to your child that on that day, it is because of what God did to me when I left free from Egypt. So this idea here of the vehigadita, that is our Haggadah. So this little highlighted bit here is the verb of and you shall tell, or rather, the way they explained it, the way and you shall explain. And from there, the idea is that we have a prescription. Why we have this commandment. When I say prescription, I mean commandment, right? That we are prescribed to, we are commanded to tell of this story. So there, that little tiny inkling there already created this need to tell. It wasn't enough for us to just eat the things or not eat the things, right? We had to tell. And so how does this telling happen? Alex, yes, question.
Yeah, I just had a question about when you said the thing about the Paschal sacrifice. Maybe you said where it is, but I don't see it here, and my brain's
It's not in the text because I didn't. Yeah, it was not in. It was in a different verse, not
Okay.
in this chunk. So it's not in here.
But it's in the same. So that's on the first night, theoretically.
No. It doesn't see that. This is the thing when the Torah explains holidays, and this is a whole other class on Jewish holidays. But the Torah really is very vague. It's vague about the way we're supposed to celebrate things, which is why, of course, we have the oral law, which is why you have tractates upon tractates of rabbis fighting with each other about, what constitutes how much of this unleavened bread. What is the unleavened bread? Who makes the unleavened bread? What is 7 days? How many days? When does it start? When does it end? None of that stuff is explained in the Torah. The Torah gives us these very large kind of headings of what we should do. And then it's up to us. Well, I don't know that was the idea, but that became the way we did it. It was up to us to figure out what to do with that. So even in that moment there of the Haggadah, and because we're focusing on the Haggadah, the rest of the stuff we can talk about another time. So the Haggadah, this idea of the telling, that's all we have. So if we look back to the Haggadah itself, it didn't exist as a text. It didn't exist because it was made by men mostly, but it was made by people. It didn't come from above. It's not a holy text in that way, as you know, right? The Haggadah is a man-made or human written text, and it's based on hundreds of years of discussions. So if we do a quick scan here, and I know that this is a class on art, but it's also important for us to kind of take a look at the foundational history of what made this book, so that we can best understand what of it is kind of set in stone and what parts of the story kind of went through different evolutions. So in Temple times, as it says, the Seder focused on expounding the different parts of the Torah, one of which, Alex, is the reference to the eating of the Paschal lamb, the sacrificial lamb, the eating of matzah and maror. And then, in addition, because it was a festival and it was part of the temple worship, so the 3 pilgrimage holidays, as you know, or maybe not, I shouldn't assume, the Israelites, the early Jews who were living in the land when the temple existed, they would bring different offerings based on the different festivals that were occurring in the Jewish year, and Passover was in that cycle. So I believe that there's something about the barley harvest around Passover, but I could be mistaken. So that we continue through here, as you can see, the first mention in the Mishnaic period, so this is here a 90 BCE till 220 CE. The first mention of the Seder occurs in the Mishnah, in the oral tradition, in the oral law. Rabban Gamliel, a lot of these guys, when you read about the codification of the Haggadah, appear themselves in the story. If you are one to read the Haggadah, not skip over and just sing Dayenu and call it a day, but actually read through it, you will see mention of a lot of these rebbes and these rabbis and these students of rabbis who did spend, countless days and nights talking through all of these conversations around what is it that we're doing in this on this night of remembrance, on this night of telling, the telling of our Exodus. And so it's really interesting in our Jewish way that we bring back the conversations in the actual text. So it becomes very meta, right? So we're reading about this guy said the 10 plagues meant blah, 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 blah. But this guy said the 10 plagues meant this times this times this, and these are the plagues. But not only are we reading this moment, if we were sitting in this moment 2,000 years ago, these guys would have been talking about this particular thing that we are now recounting as the codified text of the Haggadah. But it took a while to get there, right? All of this is a buildup to when the Haggadah became an actual codified book. So here, Rabban Gamliel, the Pesach offering, etc., etc. 70 CE, very important year in Jewish history, early Jewish history, the destruction of the Second Temple, which really marks the end of temple times, and also marks the end, very importantly, of sacrifices. So the minute not that instant, but when the Jews stopped offering sacrifices in the temple, the way that they worshipped changed completely, right? The beginning of prayer, the beginning of more solitary and more family-centered celebrations happened because we didn't have the central place where the entire community would gather during festival times. We move on. So I'm going to do this quick. I know I say quick and it doesn't sound like it's quick, but it is. So we continue through time as Talmudic disputes begin. The sages debate on the arrangement of the Haggadah. What goes where? What are we beginning with? What are we ending with? Really interesting. Similar to the story of Hanukkah, where you had the one rabbi who said, we should light all 8 candles at the beginning of the night, on the beginning of Hanukkah, and every you remember this? The idea that we should take one light away every night till we get to the very last day of Hanukkah, we should have one candle. And the other rabbi was like, that's ridiculous. We're celebrating the Festival of Lights. We should be lighting up to the pinnacle of the light. So similarly, in the creation of the Haggadah, one rabbi said, let's begin with the terrible things and then end this thing. And the other guy said, let's start it the other way around. And all of this to say that every evolution, and this is important to note because as we look at the evolution of the text itself, we're going to notice that in the way in which people interacted with the visuals of that text. What were the things that they were focusing on? Something here to know, you can read this on your own. The Geonim were really those who kind of put together the way in which they wanted, they imagined the diaspora community, because this is already the destruction of the temple meant the continuing and proliferation of the diaspora Jewish communities, and how they felt customs and traditions were going to be upheld outside of the land of Israel. So all of this, too, is reflected in the Haggadah, as the Haggadah is a text that was codified, unlike the Torah, which began very, very early. The Haggadah, because it started much later, and because the structure of it was only established way after the destruction of the temple, it reflects the community of Jews who did not necessarily all live in one place. I know I'm saying a lot, just bear with it. Okay. This is also I'll skip this line, but what's interesting to note is that early Haggadot were not books that came by themselves. They were usually a supplement in the back of the Siddur. Sometimes they came in as a part of a collection of other texts that were used for different holidays. The Haggadah in and of itself wasn't always its own published book. Just know that as well. All right, let's take a look. Let's get into some colors right now. All right, the early Haggadot. So we're going to look at illumination. I want to ask the question here of how do you think, before we talk about any of the actual illuminated Haggadot, how do you think, what was the relationship of people to books before the printing press? What was the relationship that people had to their manuscripts, we'll say, because they weren't really books? What was the relationship that either institutions, we know that most of these manuscripts existed in places where the literate were in power, right? Places of power, religious institutions mostly. What was the relationship that people had with manuscripts? Sharon.
Well, I'm going to speak of music manuscripts, if I can.
Sure, wonderful. Yes,
because
yes.
for music manuscripts, there wasn't. You'd get a piece of music in one place and you couldn't read it in another place, and that eventually led to making one common language of music. So there was no relationship except wherever you lived.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, very good. That's starting us off strong. Anything else? And I don't want to give away why I'm saying what I'm saying, but I'm trying to get us on what Sharon was saying. Yeah, Julia, what do you want to add? I think you're muted, my friend.
Sorry, this is
Okay.
also bringing to mind maybe one of the reasons why you have the illustrations is that the majority of people were illiterate and were not able to read. So you needed to have the illustrations so that the people who could not read would be able to understand the story.
Brilliant. Brilliant. That's great. That is a really great addition. Yes. We're dealing with within the Jewish population, though. You have to think that the literacy rate was a little higher than it was of the general population, but still the same. Okay, yeah, Darina.
I can only speak about the Christian world, but handwritten books were very expensive.
Yes.
And only rich people could possess them. They're typically some kind of aristocracy, or maybe the clergy, the highest ranks.
Brilliant.
The illustrations for illiterate people were actually on the church walls, where there were those pictures of heaven and hell to illustrate the message without words.
Yes.
Without written words.
Yes, yes. Yes, excellent. So to just to put this all together, before the printing press, creating any sort of, there was no mass market for anything, right? Everything was one of a kind, and if you wanted to commission something made for yourself, you would have to have a tremendous amount of money, and you would have to have the connections to know a painter or a writer or a calligrapher or an illuminated gold leaf artist, right? You couldn't just, unless you were very lucky that you lived within a certain echelon of society, you weren't able to access that. So when we're thinking about these early Haggadot, they are one of a kind. These books were not mass produced. There was no printing press in the Middle Ages. So we're looking at very special texts. And most of these texts have incredible histories of how they were preserved over centuries, right? Over millennia. I mean, I at this point, we're looking at books that it's shocking that they still exist. So we're going to.
Can I ask a question? So are they only like one of a kind because they weren't duplicated?
Yes. Yeah, they're one of a kind in the same way that you have, I imagine this is the same for any kind of manuscripts, right? You have these one of a kind. I was reading a really interesting book about it was a nonfiction about a man who was a monk in the 1200s, and his job was he was a book hunter, and he would go from monastery to monastery all over Germany, I guess, that what he was doing, and he was looking for rare books and there were only maybe one or two of them, and the whole, in these monasteries, one of the jobs of the monks would be to copy books word for word. But I think in these particular examples, because they're not just books, but they have the added art to it, they would be one of a kind anyway, I would imagine. So let's take a look at this here. The core of the Haggadah, as we said, took shape between the 8th and 10th centuries in the Babylonian academies. So the Babylonian academies were really the first communities established after the destruction of the temple, even before the destruction of the first temple, when the Jews were sent to exile, and created these incredibly rich communities of scholars. And this is how we have the Talmud has the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, because Babylonia became a center of Jewish life and learning, and many of the of our books were really written in during this exile, the Babylonian exile. The oldest surviving complete manuscript dates back to the 10th century. By the 13th century, changing social conditions and new manuscript production techniques in Europe allowed wealthy families to commission their own illustrated versions. And this is, again, we're talking about like in the Middle Ages, but we're going to see most of the examples we're going to look at now are from the 13 and 1400s. The illuminated Haggadah emerged as a distinct artistic and liturgical genre in the 13th century, evolving from a section within general prayer books. As I said, it was like a special edition kind of that was added onto a Siddur, into lavishly decorated volumes for the Passover Seder. Changing societal conditions and new manuscript production techniques in Europe. Okay. The shift occurred as the text became standardized. And so when the text became standardized, it was... obviously, these books could be written because the prayers were the same, right? They replicated the same order from book to book. All right, we're going to move quick into, I want to make sure that I can show you all of these amazing images. There are two styles we're going to be looking at today in these early manuscripts. One is the Ashkenazi, which we know to be German, but also other parts of Europe that kind of abut Germany are the Ashkenaz tradition. As it says here, these texts, the two Haggadah we're going to look at, we're going to start off with this Haggadah called the Bird's Head Haggadah, which was made in southern Germany, and designed for Ashkenazi Jews. It now lives in the Israel Museum. So there is only one, right? Remember, these are one-of-a-kind pieces. And so if we can take a look at this guy over here, what's iconic and interesting about this Haggadah, if you can see, is that what do you notice about the figures that are, I already told you because it's by the name of the Haggadah, but you can kind of see these very strange looking figures. Who can tell me what they see in these pictures or what's going on in these images? You could just call out if you want to.
The figures look like animals.
Yeah, they're birds.
They look like half human. They have very nice hands.
Right.
For mice, yeah. Birds don't have hands. These guys have they have thumbs too. Yes. What else do we know? What else do we notice about them?
I'm sorry. What is it with the yellow, like pointed hats? What is that?
We're going to talk about the pointed hats. We'll talk about the
okay.
What are we looking at? What is the actual scene that's being portrayed on the bottom?
Making the matzah.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, making the matzah. So we have what maybe looks like this could be. I mean, we don't know if they're men or women. Hard to say, right? They've got these bird heads. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're making the matzah. They're putting the matzah in the oven. And here, if you can see, we've got the word dor vador. If you could see bechol, if you can see the Hebrew bechol in every generation. This is the quote that I just told you earlier. Bechol dor vador chayav Adam lirot et atzmo. In every generation, a person must imagine themselves as though they themselves left Egypt. It's cut off here because I'm sure it's on the top of the next page. I'm going to show you the same image with the text above it, and this is just part of the Haggadah. The Haggadah lo et avotenu gaal hakadosh baruch hu. You can read this. It's basically the same text that we're reading today. With probably slight variations in what they are, but the general layout of the Haggadah has not changed from when it was set. I want to talk about these bird heads for a second, and I read some really interesting things about it. Unfortunately, too, I didn't see a ton of photos that were different bird heads, but I think that these are the best ones that really show you what these look like. I saw this really interesting thing here that said the following. Actually, Bonnie, do you want to read it? You feel like reading that? Medieval? Can you see?
Who, me?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Medievalist and art historian Dr. Mark Michael Epstein has pointed out that the figures in the Bird's Head Haggadah may not actually be bird-headed, but griffin-headed. A griffin is a mythical chimera creature that is part eagle and part lion, and the beards and manes on the male figures seem indeed leonine. The depiction of Jews as griffins would seem to indicate nobility and grandeur befitting the commission of a wealthy patron, as opposed to a negative depiction, as some scholars maintain.
Thank you. So when you obviously we don't have the reference of talking to the artist and figuring out why they use this particular representation, but there's a lot of different ideas about what these bird heads are supposed to represent. Another is as well, Julia, you were asking the question about the hats, and it says here that at that time, this Jew hat was compulsory for Jews to wear in Germany and other lands of Roman Empire. So that is supposed to be some, according to scholars, that's supposed to be some kind of a shout out to that, to that hat that they wore. And bird-like figures. This is a really interesting other commentary around why the birds. Is that, as we know in Jewish texts, it's actually, you're not permitted to kind of iconicize humans or God, right? There's like, if we go into any synagogue, there are very rarely, unless it's a high reform synagogue and they have these stained glass windows that are, right, supposed to kind of be in a more modern form, we don't find ourselves looking at Jewish art in using that kind of figurative art. So he says here, this guy, R. Ephraim, talks about how birds and horses are not animals that Jews, that anyone worshiped. That wasn't connected to kind of an idolatrous religious tradition, like cats or cows. There are different traditions that honor specific animals. And so his thought was that the heads of birds was kind of so improbable that was going to be seen as any way of being of appearing as though maybe this Jewish text was idolatrous in some way. I don't know. That's what I read. I thought it was interesting and a little bit weird. But the Bird's Head Haggadah is very, very well known because it is so bizarre. And if you and you could do some research on it, and I imagine that you probably could find examples of the text in the Jewish Museum and in Jerusalem, and look at some more if you're interested in looking at that. The second example of the Ashkenazi tradition of the illuminated Haggadah is one called the Washington Haggadah, and it's called that because it is in Washington, D.C. It's not that it is a Washington Haggadah. I was like, why couldn't they give it a better name than that? But it was created, as it says, in 1478 by a scribe and artist whose name was Yoel ben Simeon. And he blended, as it says, Ashkenazi traditions with early Italian Renaissance styles. And you're going to see what I mean by that Italian Renaissance style when we look at some examples of that. Unlike, I'm just going to read some of these little bits here, so it'll make looking at the illustrations a little bit more meaningful. Unlike these religious texts, the Haggadah features 15 detailed scenes of secular life, such as families preparing for the Seder and even a dog hoping for scraps. You're going to see that little dog in a second. It includes 2 biblical stories. One of its most controversial illustrations accompanied the word maror, bitter herbs, depicting a man pointing to his wife in a medieval joke about bitterness. And that, again, there's a picture of that one too, which I thought was very strange. And last bullet, it contains an early reference to using horseradish as the bitter herb. I don't know why it's double, which helped scholars trace its origins to southern Germany because, again, we didn't really have any guides as to what people ate back then, right? To symbolize the different things that today we know that we use parsley in some traditions, lettuce in other traditions, but the being able to look back at these Haggadot gave scholars the ability to really see what Jewish communities ate in those times. So you could see here, this does have this gesture-like very, it is a combination of an Italian Renaissance style, but this comes from Ashkenaz. So it does have that, Ashkenazi style to it. The lettering here, it's all handwritten. You could see how the calligraphy itself is quite spectacular. And I know it's not a great copy, but if you can tell around all of the words as well is a very classic illuminated style of the curly cues, and even, I don't know if this is gold leaf, but it could very well be some kind of a gold leaf on those letters. Did someone have their hand up, or did I? No? Okay. This picture here is, you can also see by the way they're dressed, right? You can tell a lot about what this illuminated Haggadah, this pictorial representation of what Jewish society looked like, or at least the very elegant and very established Jewish society of that time was wearing. And also the colors are, it's remarkable that that's maintained such a bright color scheme. And yes, Noemi.
Yeah, do you know what they use to make the art?
The pigments that they use?
Yeah.
No? I don't know offhand, but I think back then they used probably a lot of minerals mixed with linseed oil. It's probably very similar to the pigments that they were using to paint oil. I mean, the fact that it's stayed so bright over the years, I imagine, they probably did use very high quality crushed beetles and oxides mixed with linseed oils. But I don't have that information. I'm sure that and a lot of these facsimiles come from auction houses and come from museums, because many of these manuscripts have gone through over the centuries, have gone through many hands until they landed hopefully in places where they're being very well conserved.
And they probably get tested, they probably know how to test for pigmentation.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm sure that they do. This next one here is the picture with the little dog, as you can see. So this is, you see the little doggy over here under there waiting for something to be dropped in his mouth. But also unusual to have this kind of like a home scene. And I think it does speak to what we read earlier in the text of how when you were commissioning these, the private families that were commissioning these artists to create these Haggadot for them, they probably had the benefit of saying like, oh, I'd like us, can we get Uncle Paul and, Grandma Betty, get a scene of her in the kitchen mixing up the chicken soup, little ode to the family dog in that. And here, I think this is supposed to represent probably the Paschal lamb of some sort. I mean, it's a very giant rotisserie going on over here. I find that really interesting. The next picture I'm going to show you is the one reference to the bitter herbs. And you can see if you can read this over here. This is our word for the bitter herbs. Everyone see the word maror? Right? And this is the same text here. So like this is when we get to the part of the Haggadah where they say Pesach, Mazeh, like what is Pesach? What is matzah? And then they explain what each thing is. So here it says maror, ze she'anachnu ochlin, al shum ma. It's exactly the same text that we're reading, that we're going to read on Passover. The maror, that we eat, she'anu ochlin, that we eat, al shum ma. For what? Why do we eat this? Al shum shemareru hamitzrim et chaye avotenu. Because they embittered, the Egyptians embittered the life of our ancestors, avotenu ben Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Exactly the same text. And it shouldn't surprise us. I mean, it's no different than opening, right, looking at a codex, looking at a Torah scroll from the Geniza, from the Cairo Geniza, and you're like, oh my God, it's the same. It's exactly the same. There's something kind of amazing about seeing these words, recognizing the words, and saying, nothing has changed. I mean, a lot has changed, but if we go back to that baseline, right, there's something really incredible about it. Any thoughts about these two different examples? I mean, there could have been hundreds of other personalized Haggadot that over time, obviously, were destroyed in fires and in floods. It's obviously such a shame that we only have these very few examples left, but it's remarkable that they do exist and that they've been able to be preserved over these years. All right, we're going to move on to the second style. Our second style is our Sephardic Spanish Haggadot. And I do want to take some time when we finish looking at the next two examples to think a little bit about if you can think about how the styles are different. And I'm happy to go back and look at some of them side by side just to see if there is something that resonates for you. So what defines the Sephardic style? It says here, full-page biblical miniatures, gold leaf backgrounds, and influences from Gothic and Islamic art. Let's look at colors. Let's look at designs and see if there's something there that really looks different to what we have seen in the Bird's Head Haggadah, which is weird in and of itself, and in the Washington Haggadah, which is kind of classic medieval looking depictions of families and people. So we're going to look at a Haggadah called the Prato Haggadah, and it is 14th century illumination. It has, what's fascinating about it is that it is incomplete. So the artist actually was not able to finish all pages. As it says, many of the 58 unfinished leaves were left at various stages. So this gives us an example of how this illuminated technique worked, because we can kind of see the layering, right? As though if you were going into a house before it was completely renovated, and you can really see how do we peel back the layers of getting to that point of a completed manuscript. So let's take a look. We're going to start off with completed pages. There's 3 slides, starting off with this one over here. Let's see if anyone can read any of these illuminated words. They are very fancy, and some of these very strange creatures seem to be taking space in the letters. And if you can read the bottom, the line under that word, that might help you to see if you could figure out what it says. V'ya'anunu. So it va'ya va'yir. I think this is a vav yud resh ayin. Vav va'yir u. And they saw and they feared va'yir u. Barbara, is Chana there? Does she want to tell us what it says? Chana, do you want to tell us what it says? And this one over here, can you read it?
Yeah. Okay.
You got it right, but it's Vayeru. Vayeru otanu hamitzrim v'ya'anunu.
Do you want to tell us do you want to translate it
for the I think the might be here from the word Ra.
I think so too.
I think so too. Badly. They did bad things to us, and they tortured us.
Excellent.
The Egyptians.
The Egyptians, exactly.
Of then.
Excellent. Yeah, Bonnie, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about that illustration. It doesn't really look kid friendly. So
I don't think it's meant to be. I don't think it's meant to be kid friendly. And I'll say this too, like, I mean, I know as much as we talked about, which I don't disagree with having the illustrations be part of kind of allowing kids to feel connected. I don't necessarily know that in the Middle Ages there was even a concept of having anything that was geared towards kids. Right. I mean, the idea of childhood didn't really exist right until after the Industrial Revolution, if we're going to look at that history line. So maybe this is just, and there's kind of the grotesque, a level of kind of, art of a certain time period being kind of creepy, and I think that maybe fits in with that.
Yeah, it looks like kind of ancient Rome, and
yeah, it does look a little. It's true. It's not. Yeah, it's true. And this guy over here, if you look at it, this here, if you can see, says what in this box by this person who looks. It's hard to tell what they've got going on, but they have a sword in their pocket, and just a hint. This word here means the bad or evil or rasha. This guy here is supposed to represent what from the Haggadah? If I say the four sons. This is the section of the Haggadah that represents the four sons. And this is the evil or the bad son. I guess upon closer observation, you could see that he's not looking like a good guy. And that's
But you can tell that there's like an Asian influence.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know what? It's hard to tell. It feels like there's like a hat and then there's actually a beard, but it is really hard to see.
It looks like they're smoking too.
It does look like they're smoking. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next over here. And again, we're talking about the influences of a kind of Islamic art and a Gothic art in this. And you can see that, right? I don't know if you've had that kind of exposure to old, like, right, Arabic manuscripts, but there is something the flowers, the columns even over here that are of a certain place. All right, I'm going to flip us to this slide, which is the two unfinished pages. What do you see on the right? And you could tell by the picture if you don't know what the words. Actually, you should all know how to. Well, I shouldn't say you should all know how to do this.
Matzah.
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 Nachon, there is the matzah. I'm concerned about that hay looking like a chet, but that's just just going to be picky about that. And here you have these two women, looks like holding up a very maybe Moorish designed matzah. Very beautiful, but unfinished. And here we have, and if you know this, Betzet Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, right? Betzet Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me Amloez. A famous song that is a passage of the Haggadah that is very recognizable if you're someone who recognizes some of those melodies and texts. Unfinished. Wow. Really interesting to see that. Okay, I'm going to move on to the fourth and final example of this of our Haggadah. This is one of the most interesting stories, and some of you may already know the story of the Sarajevo Haggadah. There are many books, and even I don't even know if there was a movie about saving this specific Haggadah. It originated in Spain around 1350, the oldest Sephardic Haggadah in existence, and is currently housed at the National Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So what's interesting about it is the Haggadah opens up with these absolutely beautiful illuminated miniature paintings that really go through the entire arc of the Torah. And it's almost like an illustrated Torah right before it starts the story of the Exodus, and it goes through all of these gorgeous. I'm just going to show you what I mean by that. So this here, every page of this Haggadah has these gorgeous paintings and stories from the Torah. This is one of the 10 plagues. I think this is the lice, and this is the locusts, or whatever.
Locust, yeah.
But you could see that the way that the book is organized is these gorgeous paintings, and each one they're one of a kind. Every one of these pages.
And Miya, it has no text.
It does. I didn't get to the text part yet. It opens. So I want to show you what the 34 opening pages are. Unusual for Jewish texts of the era, it features elaborate human figures. As we said earlier with the bird's head, there was something about not drawing people in a holy text, or the Haggadah is not a holy text, but it is, because it's part of a ritual, but it's not like a Siddur or a Torah, where of course we don't have illustrations. There was a kind of it was seen as not Jewish, maybe just not traditional, or maybe even frowned upon. So this particular, as you can see, it doesn't have birds, it doesn't have horses. It has other animals as well, but it does portray humans and figures in a very as realistic as you could get in the Middle Ages, in that way. The other thing that's really interesting about it here is that it says, I didn't find this over here, but it says it depicts a dark-skinned woman at a Seder table, which has long intrigued scholars. And another scene shows the Red Sea divided into 12 paths, one for each tribe, as in the 12 tribes of Israel. And so again, looking at these early representations, you really can, even a tiny little subset, right, understand maybe how these different Jewish communities believed their own story to be. Because we don't have, unless we could travel back in time, there is no way for us to know what living in that community might have been like. And these kind of representations are really fascinating and a really interesting way to get into that mindset. And I'm going to say, moving just a little bit of a tidbit to feed you for next time. When we're thinking about these Haggadot and how they represent the way in which a certain community thought of themselves and thought their own, thought about how they fit into the larger Jewish story, I want us to think about what, next we're going to look at contemporary Haggadot and the way in which artists today using these themes can find very creative ways to connect thematically to these Passover themes. I want you to think about that. What does it mean to be represented in images? And again, how does that add a layer of connection, especially for Pesach? If we go back to that idea of the significance of the story, that it is a timeless, it is very timeful. We know exactly when in our arc of Judaism, the Exodus from Egypt happened, but that moment is embedded in our legacy, in the way in which we talk about being Jewish, right? How the Exodus from Egypt is really our freedom story. It's really our beginning, the beginning of that moment where we became a people. So to think about how we're using this story and we want to personalize it, we want to make this a story that we find ourselves represented in that story. I want you to think about what that means for you. What would you like to see in a Haggadah that would feel like I see myself in that story? Just think about that for a second. So here is this. I don't know if this is the image. Oh, here's the dark-skinned woman. She's right here in that corner, looking very different to the other people at the table. So this was a puzzle for scholars. Apparently, no one's really made any headway in figuring out what this person is doing and what they're supposed to represent. And this too is Netilat Yadayim Hamotzi. This looks like it's from the very beginning of the Haggadah. Would you say the introduction of Kadesh or Chatz, Karpas, Yachatz, when it goes through the order of what we're doing on Pesach? I feel like this might be from the beginning of the Haggadah. Or it's at the end. It might be very much at the where it tells you that we're washing our hands right before we eat our meal. Hard to say.
Well, somebody's drinking a glass of wine, perhaps.
Someone is drinking a glass of wine. You're right. You're right. Also, the other thing that was noted is a lot of these Haggadot are stained with wine and food, and it's obvious that these were functional books. They weren't meant as decorative books. And this is a stunning, really beautiful page here. And it looks like here is Moshe. Here is Moses on Mount Sinai. It looks to me like this would be Moses doing some kind of a benediction on the children of Israel. Absolutely gorgeous colors on this. Yeah. All right. So we have come to time. I want you to think about this. And we can discuss it. We could continue this via email. You can write this out in a notebook, and we can start next week thinking a little bit about recurring themes. We talked about visuals adding to the experience with text, and then what we're going to do when we look at more contemporary images, we're going to really look at how the printing press really shaped that, how the mass market really shapes the difference in the way we relate to illustration and what that means to move from the personal to the communal, because all of these were made for people, specific people, and we're going to be moving into a more communal way of thinking about images. So for next class, if you can, and if you forget, that's fine too. If you want to bring in an image from a Haggadah that is meaningful to you, or something that you've seen that you connect with, or a moment in the Haggadah that you would be curious to see how it is represented visually. Because we're going to look at some, I'm going to try to do next week there's a lot to show, so I'm going to see if I can limit it to a few different time periods. But there are some incredible, Holocaust Haggadot. There are Haggadot that are created now. There's a design company in Israel that's been making a Haggadah every single year for the past, I want to say 12 years, and they commission graphic designers and artists to take one page of the Haggadah and make it their own. And it's incredibly gorgeous. So I'm going to bring some examples of that as well. But think about that. Think about how does image and art and visualization and color and layout, how does that help you to connect with something that is inherently part of our story? You know, how do we make that more through that? Sorry, I talked so much. I did not even give you guys a chance to comment at all. But hopefully next time, maybe we can go a little longer next time, so we can have 15 minutes to talk. But you have a break of a half an hour before you will see, if you guys are staying for the second half, Cantor Rosen is going to be teaching his class on music and the music of Pesach. And I actually think I'm going to join that class. So I'll be there. I have nothing else going on today, and it's miserable.
Is he teaching his class today? Because you said that he would be teaching in the last 2 weeks.
No, you know what? It was switched, and no one told me. You know, communication. We're all, everything's good. But now I know. I sent the email. I made a mistake. But yes, Cantor Rosen will be teaching at 7:30. So you guys have a half an hour or a little less to go get something to drink, and we'll meet back here in a half an hour for Cantor Rosen's class. Fantastic. Thank you all for
Mia.
Great, Mia. Great class.
I'll see you next week.
Thanks, yeah.
I have no time conflict for that one.
Yeah. Bye.